Good morning, Lakeview. It is I am thankful to be here and to be encouraged by you, but I'm going to confess I'm also thankful because Sunday morning right now represents the end to a long week for me. It has I know that sounds strange. I'm up here about to deliver a message, but it has been a long week. Couple things. If you have kids and you have not been here on Wednesday night participating in our Bible classes, you are, and I mean this, you are missing out on some incredible opportunities. For this last year, we've had a class going on in Room 4, which I have really enjoyed, and we've talked about all sorts of aspects of parenting, grandparenting, hopes, dreams, failures. It's kind of like a support group, so to speak, of parents to talk about, what it is to raise parents and some of the struggles we raise kids. Some of the struggles that we have. Did I tell you I was tired? Okay, because illustrations deteriorate the more tired I am. What it is to raise our kids in the context of our families and our church, and it's been a blessing to me. I've been doing that over the last year. It's been almost 3/4 now, and was invited to go down to actually a couple churches in Portland invited me to go down and do a seminar. I just finished one on Saturday in Gresham. And we went over a variety of lessons together, and I realized, some of this material is stuff that we should take a look at here. This isn't exactly material that I shared, but I want to share one lesson, because this has been the crux of a number of conversations we've had on Wednesday night about parenting, some of the purposes of parenting, and specifically, this is profound stuff. This has to do with our theology and our faith. It has to do with the direction and the character of our lives, and it has to do with our hopes and dreams for our kids. So to some degree, there's going to be a point in time where if you have grade school kids, I'm actually going to give you some very direct suggestions about what to do to instill discipline for them. If you don't, you need to keep your ears open anyway, because you'd be amazed at how much of this material addresses me as an adult, my relationship with Christ, and how I function in the world today. Okay, and first, before I deal with that, I want to read this for you. In Proverbs chapter 25, starting with verse 26, it says, "A man without self-control." Do you hear me? "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." A man without self-control is like a city that has been broken into and it's left without walls. Many years ago now, my son was about 4 years old, and as it's always been the case, that I enjoy summers in the Northwest. And one day I remember being out in my backyard working on the garden for something, and Jesse was out there palling around with me, and like a good dad, he called out for my attention, and I ignored him, and I continued doing what I was supposed to do, which is get this task done. He called out again, and he said, "Dad, look, Dad, look." And I ignored him because I had a task to finish. He goes, "Dad, look, he likes me. He likes me. I have a friend." And I thought, what in the world did my son, what is he talking about? And you know how kids today play with Minecraft? Yeah, kids today. Back in my day, we actually had real rocks that we played with, and you play with Minecraft instead. So we were out there in the yard, and growing up, I've always had this joy and fascination with daddy longlegs. Do you know that spider? The daddy longleg, right? It's the spider that is strangely fragile, and if you handle it incorrectly, one of its limbs pops off and it drops on the ground and it's twitching, right? You know what I'm talking about? All right. Yeah, so I turn around and I see my son holding this perfect pill with no legs attached to it anymore, and all of the legs kind of twitching on the ground, and I thought what any good father would think at that exact moment. What are the early warning signs for a psychopath? Right? And I went in and I Googled and I couldn't find anything worthwhile on that. And I recognize that being a parent at almost any stage in life, almost any decade, means that you have to pick up a book and you have to read what this generation says is most important about parenting. And the rules are going to change from year to year, which means what's really important to my parents' generation about parenting doesn't seem to be on the New York bestsellers list anymore. It's something different. And right when you think you've got it, this is what parenting in the 21st century is like. You get shamed by somebody who says you've done it all completely wrong, and it's turned around and it's backwards, right? And so when it comes to being a parent today, here's what I think. In general, parents require a great amount of grace and latitude because there is nothing like the parent shaming culture that we live in today, where every parent feels like they can't ever do it right. And also, I think that we don't have a lack of people giving rules about what good parents should and should not do. And so I don't think that parents actually need a set of rules. I think that though they can live and parent with basic principles and work off of those. Here's probably the biggest one, this one. Parents should engage in disciplining their kids as opposed to punishing. Parents should be interested in discipline much more than they should be interested in punishment. Now, that's not to say that punishment doesn't have a place in the concept of discipline, but it is to say that punishment and discipline as we use them today seem to almost be interchangeable words, and they're not. Punishment and discipline are radically different ideas. Let me draw a really sharp point to that. Discipline is all about my child, right? It's about who they are going to become. It's about their character. It's always focused on them. Punishment can be focused on them if it's a part of discipline, but punishment doesn't have to come from a father who loves a child. I can be punished by the United States government that maybe doesn't care that I develop character. I can be punished by somebody that I have done wrong to. And there's no relationship at all and no interest in me. They're only interested in themselves. A punishment is you do this and therefore this happens. Now, while that can be a part of what it is to discipline a kid, it's not the big picture. That means when you lose your temper and you scold your child or you spank them in that moment in anger, you've accomplished punishment, but you may not have accomplished discipline. Do you see this distinction? Discipline is focused on the other person. Punishment can be focused on myself. Discipline always has a relationship. Punishment has no relationship. Discipline is a long-term game, and punishment is immediate, right? So there's a difference between these two terms, and here's why I'm bringing this up. Because there's a text in Hebrews that actually draws our attention to it. It was read earlier in Hebrews chapter 12. Turn with me if you would. Hebrews chapter 12. We're going to take a look at this text. And just to give you a context for this, the author here is writing to people in the church who are experiencing a tremendous hardship. Right? They want to follow Christ, but they're feeling the pushback in every aspect of their culture. And at the time that the book of Hebrews was written, it's very likely that there were Christians who were not just sacrificing socially for their faith. Right? Believers do sacrifice socially for their faith. If you haven't experienced that yet, in the Pacific Northwest, not enough people know that you're a believer. Now, I'm serious about that, right? Living here in the Pacific Northwest, it is not anymore an advantage to confess Christ, right? We're starting to feel the social pushback for the confession of Christ. Well, in the book of Hebrews, he's addressing this fact that Christians are not just feeling a social stigma, they're feeling a physical stigma. This affects their pay. This affects their very life and their safety. People are losing their lives for their faith, right? And so they're asking this question, why, oh God, is this happening to us? Why does my life look like this? And this is the advice that he gives him in Hebrews chapter 12, starting with verse 3. He says, "Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility as himself, that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted in your struggle against sin. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood." He's like, it's bad, but you haven't given your life yet, and Jesus did, right? And he says, "Have you not forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons?" The author of Hebrews here says, I understand that you're going through a difficult time. I understand that life is not what you expected. But do you not remember that God considers you his son? And for some reason, at that moment, knowing that I am a son of God changes everything. It changes my ability to see my circumstance, my struggle, my pain, and my trials, because I'm a son of God. Why? He says, have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastises every son in whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure God treating you as sons. For what son is there whom the Father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which we have all participated, then you are actually illegitimate children and not sons. In other words, here's what a good father does. A good father looks at his child and he recognizes that this child is a vessel and needs to learn to be a disciplined person. And so he puts boundaries around his son or daughter. They craft and shape the character so that in the future there's a reward about who this person is. He says, so this hardship that you're experiencing right now, this is actually evidence that you are in fact God's son and God loves you. Guess what? I don't care nearly as much about your kids as I do. I do, but only a certain amount, as much as I do mine. I'm in it to win with my kids. I want my kids to have this character. It's my job to craft and shape them to be self-disciplined, godly men and women. That's my job as their dad, right? So what he's saying here is, if you don't experience this from God, that's actually evidence that he doesn't care about you like his own kids. He says, besides this, verse 9, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seems best to them, but he disciplines us for our good so that we may share in his holiness. That idea of holiness in the Old Testament is always tied to behavior and lifestyle, right? God says, go and take this land as your possession, and you will live in this way. You will eat this food. You will behave in this way. You will keep my laws. You will be holy because I am holy, right? This idea of holiness is tied to the way we live. And he says, verse 11, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. But later, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Two things. He says, for at the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. Maybe I'm the only child in the world who got spanked by my father with a belt. My mom had a twisted sense of humor when I was 5 or 6, or really early memory. She would send me out to pick my own switch. Which, for a 5 or 6-year-old, you're like, okay, thank you for putting me in the driver's seat. I now have the power to determine my fate. And I'd go and look at all of the sticks and I'm like, which one is the right one? This little one that's kind of floppy? No, that's a whip. Okay, that's not right. this big club. This will surely be better. And my poor little 5-year-old brain would look at all of these switches and go, I know there's an answer. I just don't know what it is. And then I'd bring her a switch and it hurt. And when she got done switching me, when my dad got done spanking me, every time my parents disciplined me, I never, ever turned to them and said, thank you. There was a point in time when my mom broke a wooden spoon and I laughed, and that's a mistake. But I never said thank you. Okay, and here's why I'm telling you this. Discipline. Discipline is never anything that we want. And sometimes when it's happening, we cannot distinguish between the good that is going to come out of discipline or just something that somebody has against me, right? At the moment, I'm getting spanked. All I think is, this is awful. Choose something else, Dad. Right? I tried patting. It didn't work. The Word of God is a good shield, but he noticed. So what he's saying here in this text, he says, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. He's saying, you know what? If you're in the middle of God disciplining you, you're going to experience life and it's going to be hard. And you're going to look around and go, why is this happening to me? And he says, it'll feel painful rather than pleasant. You might not even be able to see the distinction between discipline and punishment. Think about poor Job as he goes through all the trials. And we get a peek into the system. We know why Job is going through these trials. He asks God over and over and over again, why is this happening to me? And God doesn't give him a straight answer. He says, stop asking me, I'm God. Right? When we're going through it, you're not always going to be able to know and see clearly the end result that God sees in discipline. But he does discipline children that he loves. But the goal, later it says, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Which means God, even in the struggle that you experience right now in life as his child, God has a goal in mind. Your character is being shaped by those moments. That pain that you consider unbearable, that loss, that anguish that you'd rather dismiss and run away from. God is shaping you and crafting you for righteous purposes. Do you hear me? Okay. He's interested in you in the long term. Parents, this is what I mean. Now this changes. Do you see how this changes everything? Right? The adversity that you go through, the pain that you go through, this question, why, oh God, do you have something against me, transforms the moment you recognize that God is a God who loves you, that wants something good for you, that at the end of this race, there is something better in you and your character than you have right now because he will shape you through it. That's discipline. Discipline is for you. One of the reasons why I think we need to start thinking deeply about discipline instead of punishment with our kids is because God thinks in that way towards us. I struggle with the idea that God is only interested in punishing me for my wrongdoing, but I can persevere if I recognize that God has something greater in store for me. The whole conversation changes when I recognize that God is interested in me. Okay, so the goal of discipline is to build character. That's why is this the most famous parenting text in the Bible? Proverbs 22:6. We use it as a club sometimes. Yeah, if your child is not doing things right, you did something wrong as a parent. It's not intended to be used that way. Proverbs isn't intended to be used that way. These are principles with which to live by. It's not a foolproof plan, right? It's not like baking. You mess something up in the ingredients if it turns out wrong. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. God has a purpose in building in our discipline, and it is to build our character. What does that mean for us as parents? It means that if you're parenting, make those choices carefully with purpose for the future of your child so that they grow with great character. And let me pop through a list of a handful of things, and this is not this isn't a finished list, but these are some principles. This is a list of 6 things that I think are actually important for us, parents of young kids, that help to craft the character of our kids. Okay? Here you go. Punishment with love. Okay, I think in general, most of us can agree that dad saying this hurts me more than it hurts you is a flat out lie. Right? And I heard that several times, and I'm like, Dad, come up with something better than that. Please, that's just a lie. But what he meant by that is true. It's hard to apply discipline to a kid when it's time for punishment, because the kid hurts and you hurt for them, right? And the only way to make the distinction that this is not punishment for punishment's sake, this isn't punitive, is that the kid, your child, understands that it's happening in the context of a relationship, that you care about them, that you love them, which means wherever the punishment takes place, make sure that the hug isn't very far away. I mean that. And that's important because because more and more we live. Do you realize how much of a touch-phobic culture we live in right now? I mean, this is beyond being a German. We're touch-phobic. When I go to get change at Starbucks after giving them a $10 bill and receiving $1 and some change. Good night, that's out of control. They're always surprised because they reach for my right hand and I'm left-handed. And you will watch them shimmy as they try to figure out how to toss the change in my hand and the bills so that our hands don't touch. And when it doesn't work properly, I notice. And so do they. I mean, like, we don't touch. We've become a group of people that are completely isolated from each other. And there was a study done in 2000. It started in 2000. It's called the Bucharest Project. If you've been involved in education or childhood development, you might actually be aware of this. It was when Romania first opened up its borders, and the Western world started to realize that in Romania there are orphanages. I mean, like full-on orphanages, like Annie orphanages, where kids are gathered together and they receive food, kinda. They have beds to sleep in, kinda, but they're herded together. There's no meaningful interaction with adults. There's no opportunity for them to find somebody who loves and cares about them completely, right? And what they found was this group of kids in Romania lacked affection. Growing up, they lacked affection because they had no meaningful contact with adults. No, babies did not have an adult to rock them to sleep at night. They were left to cry. Children didn't have anybody to they didn't have a lap to sit in for an adult to read to them. They didn't have somebody to hug them when they were hurt or wounded. These are kids who are neglected, right, in every way, and in every station in age and life. And so we did what any good Western power would do when you find kids that have been abandoned like that in the system. I don't know what possessed us to do this, but we launched a long-term study about the effects of neglect. And we took 130 kids out of that system and placed them in foster care. Foster care is different than an orphanage, right? Foster care is where a kid comes to a house. He's given a mom and a dad, and they say, "We love you. We care about you. Your hurts are our hurts. We're going to pour into you." Radically different system. what they found after studying these kids over the years is that the kids who experienced neglect, a lack of human contact, touch, and meaningful interaction, the kids who had no adults invested in them, started developing problems. Wide-ranging problems. Problems you would never... Okay, you know how people say sometimes when dad is distant, somebody grows up with daddy issues? Right? That's how we call it in the Western world, right? This is way beyond daddy issues. This is their brain chemistry changed. You could put them under an EEG and their brains read differently than kids who were put in foster care. And those kids, as they developed, they struggled. They struggled in cognitive function. They scored lower on IQ tests. They struggled with motor development and language. They showed deficiencies in empathy and socio-emotional behaviors and had a higher degree of psychiatric disorders. Now, here's why I'm telling you this. It's because when kids have a lack of meaningful touch from their parents and adults who care about them, the more we do this, the more we learn that brains are actually, there's chemistry in our brains. And an absence of certain chemistry at certain times profoundly affects our brains, right? And so babies who don't have anyone to rock them to sleep at night, and children that don't have an adult to read to them, somebody who isn't there to hug them, and their whole experience has an absence of affirmation from adults, this transforms their mental capacity. And if you can't connect the dots, let me connect them for you. There's a reason why kids in our country who grow up in at-risk homes with parents who don't give them attention struggle in school. It's not just that mom and dad aren't there to help them with their homework. Those kids still excel if they have mom and dad giving them hugs, telling them that they're loved, knowing that there's somebody there in their corner. And this is important because, as a pendulum swings back and forth in parenting, there's been a lot of talk about how corporal punishment is awful for kids. You should never do something physical to them, the spanking, all that stuff, right? And the pendulum is starting to swing as we recognize that there's been so much talk about not touching kids that we actually are starving kids for the affection that they need. There have been countless articles a couple months ago about how foster care in the UK is struggling because kids are adopted by are sent into foster families, and the families are coached on how to make physical contact and how much physical contact to avoid. Dads are told when you go to pick them up after school, don't let them sit in the front seat in case somebody thinks that there's something inappropriate happening. This is when you can, this is when you should hug, this is when you should not. But when you come to pick them up, make sure that they're in the back seat so that everything is above board. Men are so afraid to show affection to children today that our children are starved of it. Other people's kids coming to live with foster families have so many rules that we don't know how to show affection and love. And here's where this connection comes. This is the ground for your kids knowing that you have a relationship. Those points of affection tell them that they're loved. If they only receive punishment without affection, they will never know that it is done for their good. So don't say this hurts you more than it hurts me, but let them know that they're loved. Always. Don't punish out of anger. Make sure that punishment is also accompanied with praise. Another helpful tool for creating discipline in kids is boundaries. Parents are actually awful about boundaries these days. When kids are unhappy, that's when boundaries crumble. You cannot do that. Kids throw a fit, and then parents always buckle on a boundary. Well, let me tell you, a boundary is only a boundary if it stays put. The moment the door opens, a kid recognizes that this is not a boundary any longer. And boundaries are important for how we think about who we are. This is how you tell a kid, this is where you're at. This is who you are. This is who we are. This is the boundary. We don't go past this one. We don't go past this one. We don't go past this one. These are the boundaries. When boundaries are removed, kids don't know who they are. So let me encourage you, parents, boundaries are good. This has to do with developing character in your kids. Routines. This sounds like we're just stifling things here, but let me tell you, routines are valuable. Have you ever noticed how if you have a good Saturday where you get up but you don't have to start the routine as though you're going into work, and suddenly 3 hours later you're like, well, why hasn't my day started? There's a reason for that. It's because routines actually help to reset certain things about how our brains work, right? Kids need routines. They absolutely need a bedtime routine, a wake-up routine, maybe a lunch routine, and they need to know that that's how you gear up for your day. That boundaries thing, that routine thing, I pretty regularly have parents that come up to me and say, I want to bring the whole family to church, but they do not want to come. For real, this happens. And you know what? I think at some point in time, we had those conversations in my house too. Now, I'm a preacher, right? So I'm going to be here on Sunday, right? But not just because it's my job. My kids have been raised to understand that this is a routine that we have, and it is a boundary that we expect that we're going to be with God's people on Sunday. So much so, when we were on vacation for our anniversary, we were on this massive road trip, and I was just curious. My kids hopped in the car and went to church as though there was nobody leaning on them, no kicking and screaming, no none of that. Well, that happens because every time they ever kicked and screamed, that boundary never moved. The routine for getting ready on Sunday morning is more rigid than the routine for getting ready on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. And those help to frame who we are. Routines are important for discipline with kids. You notice discipline is a much broader idea here than just punishment. Chores. Oh, good grief, please give your child chores. No, I'm serious. When they go to college and they don't know how to do their own laundry, come on now. That's worth an amen. Okay. But chores are more than that. It also helps them to identify that they're a part of the family, that they're pitching in with the family, that this is their identity, this is their tribe, this is who they are. They don't all have to be the same chores, but they need some because that is their responsibility. Helps them to know who they are. Oh boy. Did you know that the average teenager, 12 to 18, spends 9+ hours in front of a screen every day, not including their time in front of a screen at school? And preteens are at about 7. You can fall off your chair. I'll wait for you to get back up. Okay. Now, screens are a part of our world, and they're not going away anytime soon. And not all screen time is the same. Let me tell you about just a little bit of research, and this has to do with kids creating good boundaries, parents enforcing good boundaries. There was a book written by Daniel Kahneman about 9 years ago, and it was his seminal work. He wrote a book called Thinking, Fast and Slow. What he discovered was that our brains have two systems for dealing with information. There's a thinking fast system. It's the one where you're not really thinking, you're just kind of reacting. You don't actually sit there and go left foot, right foot when you're walking, right? You're not thinking about it. It just happens. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out, right? You are actually in control of that. That's your brain. You can stop doing that. Don't. But you're in control of it. But that happens in a part of our brain that is the thinking fast part. We don't give any critical thought to it. It just kind of happens. Driving starts off as a thinking slow, high anxiety, I'm stressed out, I can't believe it, all these things that are happening. Eventually, for most of us, it migrates to the thinking fast part. You're just driving, right? Your brain is filtering out things that it doesn't pay attention to. If you're a cyclist, you know that or a motorcyclist, you know that there are automobiles who wreck into cyclists and they will swear they could pass a lie detector test. I did not see them, right? But they strike a motorcyclist or a cyclist. That's because there's only one part of their brain thinking, and it didn't notice to pay attention to the cyclist. Now, what happens in our brains is that the thinking slow part, that's where everything slows down and your brain is working really hard. Think mental math, right? How good are you at mental math? 12 times 328. Yeah, just trying to give it thought right now and you're like, nope, I'm not going to. Because it's hard. It kicks into a part of your brain that starts eating resources that you don't normally want to. This is called the thinking slow part. Your brain starts ramping up and you think very carefully and methodically about what this is, right? The thinking slow part, when you study and you're learning something new, you're thinking slow. Every time I write a lesson or I get up to preach, I'm thinking slow about what the next words are. This takes energy. What they found was that this actually depletes energy stores in your brain. Your brain is consuming glucose in exactly the same way that a runner's body and their muscles store glucose, and after they're completely spent, for some reason you can barely walk because there's literally no energy left in your muscles. Your brain works that way with thinking slow, which means the more energy and interest, people call this emotional investment, but it's not. This is actually your brain ramping up to think carefully about something. When your best friend is, all right, junior hires, when your best friend just broke up with their brand new boyfriend and her world is ending, and for some reason you're really deeply invested in this, that's why you get tired too, right? Okay, this is still thinking slow. You're invested with your entire brain. And it absolutely exhausts you. Not all screen time is the same. Watching TV is not the same. This is thinking slow. This is easy. But when kids are required to go on the internet and do research and research and research and research, and suddenly the entire world is now available to them, and their friends like to Instagram and Snapchat all the junior high drama that they're suddenly invested in again. By the way, this exact point, yesterday at Metro, I was talking about. I have a brand new phone. I don't know how to silence it. And at this exact point, I was 5 minutes into 3 different people trying to get a hold of me. And my phone was buzzing and buzzing and buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. Instant messenger, texts, and a missed phone call. And everybody in the room was looking at my phone, wondering if I was going to pick that up or answer it, wondering what was going on over there. And I was wondering what was going on over there. Somebody's life blew up, right? And mind you, this was right at the time Nikki was having a memorial service for her brother who died. So lots of life going on right now. Let me tell you, when I'm done right now preaching to you, thinking slow, I'm going to crash. And I'm going to drink Gatorade and try to replenish all of the glucose that is now gone. Or you're going to grab me after this sermon and talk about how your marriage is struggling, or you're hurt because your kids left home, and I'm going to be invested in that. And if you don't find me here, you might find me on my phone later. We live in a culture where being so connected actually depletes us and makes us run on zero. And this technology in the hands of our children is not good, because they never get a break. You know, your brain, the only way to get that back in your brain is to take a break, to sleep, to rest, to hide, to turn it off. Not all screen time is the same, but what our kids get on screens emotionally invests them into connecting when they need downtime. So, limit screens. Consider the kind of screen time your kids get. This helps them have downtime. Oh yeah, this, and another one. Hey, you know, I know it's an American thing to decide that everything is going to be go, 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 go. I don't remember who said it first in a book somewhere. Consider a frog day. Maybe that Saturday where nothing is scheduled, maybe nothing should be scheduled. I don't know why it's called a frog day. Maybe it's because you hop around. Take a day off with your family to rest. To rest. No, I'm good. And this last one, early bedtimes. Good grief, your kids need to sleep for their brains to be ready for the next day. Now, the funny thing about all of this is none of this really, you're listening to this list and you're like, yeah, this is good stuff for my kids. All right, yeah, we need to. The last three are all about kids actually taking a break in life. And as I'm telling you this, and I've already told you I'm like exhausted right now, yeah, and you know that you hit that point in your life as you move from one thing to another because we honor and we respect productive people who are busy. Hey, how you doing this week? Well, I'm really busy is almost always the answer somebody gives. It's great to be busy. But you actually need to take a break too. You need to take a break too. All of the world's most famous artists, great towering intellects, did not have the work ethic that we lift up. They took breaks and then did incredible things. In this day, we actually need to talk about this, the ability to Sabbath. Okay? And all of this because I want kids who are raised with great character and discipline and self-control. I know it's not a list that you can just open up. But the 7 deadly sins? 6 of those are all about self-control. When you go to nuke a burrito, so it only takes 30 seconds for you to get your meal, you saved minutes off of previous generations. And you fill that with something else because you're going to multitask while that burrito is being microwaved. And the idea of self-control is that it's better to not sometimes. It's better not to give in to the impulse control. It's better not to talk. It's better not to eat. It's better to not. I know it's last on the list of the fruit of the Spirit, but self-control is actually there. And I want to draw your attention just one more time here to Proverbs 25, because this is where I'm going. This is for you, this is for me, this is for our kids, and this is my prayer for us. He says, Proverbs 25, starting with verse 27, "It is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." So this idea of discipline, this idea is important for you and me, us as adults, and also for our kids being raised in a world without any boundaries, without any breaks, without any rest. I hope that your kids are raised with a sense of self-control as a part of the character that they are given through discipline. And I know that it is God's purpose for us that in whatever we're going through as a loving Father, that hard times produce discipline inside of us and a greater character. Like I said earlier, I know I'm already out of time, but like I said earlier, let me encourage you, parents, last week and this week, take this job seriously. The church here has tools and resources to help you. If you're not here on Wednesday, I hope you're plugged in somewhere and taking this parenting thing seriously. But be committed not to just punishment, but to the idea of discipline, which is much broader and about who your child will become, because that's how God cares about you and I as his children. And I want to close out here, and I want to offer an opportunity for you to respond because, like he said in Hebrews, sometimes the struggle is real. Okay, that's not in the text. But sometimes the struggle is very real. And it's hard to know what you're going through in life is going to be worth it. And if you're struggling right now, I want to encourage you to ask for the prayers of the church. We have some shepherds here who are praying weekly, because I'm there, for this congregation. Everyone who asks for prayers from them is prayed for regularly. I know some of them are praying for you daily on their own. And if you need the prayers of one of the shepherds or this congregation, you have an opportunity to respond. You'll find them in the back of these aisles during this song, and you can go find them and you can pray with them right now. But if you have another need, whatever it is, let us know. We'd love to serve you and help you. And it's not easy going through trials, but we know that we have a loving God who cares about us. And we care about you too. Let us know how we can serve you, how we can pray with you, and how we can help you this morning as we stand and sing this song.
Days are filled with song.